Hi, very good morning. Jim from Avstar. Oh, it's been a week, hasn't it? And been some events that have been taking place over in Ukraine, which I thought was well worth talking about just briefly. So, the order, as far as I've been made aware, or from what I found out, has been given to evacuate Donetsk. And I think all this fits in place with, Trump's 50-day demands on Russia, because I think it's already been decided what's going to happen. If the Ukraine is going to pull out of Donetsk and all the other areas, it means that Russia has been successful in what it wanted to do by securing a huge land border and a military protective zone. And when people are evacuating a city like Donetsk, then that's what's going to be happening over the next 50 days. So I think this will be ramping down now. I think the off-ramp's been put there for Ukraine, and they've got no choice really but to take it and lose territory and try and hold on to whatever little they can now. And there's obviously a lot of protests going on at the moment in Ukraine over these anti-corruption laws being reduced, and that is not going to go down with any nation that has been under duress for the last 3 years, some would even say 10 years of war with Russia. And it was known from the very get-go at the beginning of this war, Ukraine was never going to be able to beat one of the world's largest armies in the world. And if it weren't for stupid prime ministers like Boris Johnson running straight over there with arms deals on the table and trying to convince Ukraine people, or at least politicians, that they had a cat and mouse chance of, if they just fought off Russia for a prolonged period of time, which has turned into a war of attrition, then they would get some success out of it. Well, there is no success gained. There has been a loss of massive territory. It's now been evacuated, so that means it's been turned over to the Russian forces. And then all that is needed to be done now is crossing the T's and dotting the I's on, some form of documentation that is accepted by both parties, the Ukrainians and the Russians, and that will be the end of this. But there is, like I say, a massive loss of life unnecessarily, because now we've reached the situation where people have got no choice but to talk and resolve this in a democratic, negotiative form of fashion. And all these mainstream media outlets are 100% aware of what's going on. CNN running over there, the BBC running over to the Ukraine, the Guardian and Sky News and all the other big brand news outlets are all going over there right now for the announcement of some form of deal that Ukraine's done. And of course Zelensky isn't out of yet, but he's definitely been shown the door, and this will be the precursor of it, with the reduction of those anti-corruption policies that he's weakened. So, massive loss for Ukrainians. But you can't say that they didn't fight hard over these last 3 years, and it's come at a massive cost of life, like I said. But this is how the world is worked now. I don't think some of the subscribers we've got here on the channel are completely aware of just how corrupt this world is. Donald Trump, you're telling me with his 50-day announcement to Russia that he didn't know that this was on the cards. And then there's that Epstein files, which I'm sick of hearing, to be honest. But, how could you not have more blatantly showed everyone around the world that you're corrupt and that you hid the Epstein files, because your name's all over it, and so are a lot of his friends. But people are very slow in the general public to realise that this does affect their lives, and if they allow it to happen, then they can't expect a better outcome for doing that, because this has been going on for years now. These rich elite politicians fly off to Davos. They make all these future plans probably 12, 24 months in advance before it's even, spoke or whispered about in the general media to inform the general public. And that's what it seems like they don't want to ever achieve now with, the manufacturing of these lies that we see in the press over the mainstream. No wonder mainstream media and news lost, their viewers and listeners and people that paid attention to them, because they were just sick and tired, as they are even more so today, of listening to this crock of shit that is constantly pumped out the manufacturing propaganda news machine. So, we shouldn't expect any less. But what I will say is, with the extensive powers now that are being enforced on channels like this one, that, talk about climate, talk about the magnetic pole shift, which is gaining traction still. I haven't give up. Just because we've took a little bit of a back burner, and that's because, the funding problem, doesn't mean that I've give up on that, because I think there's still a fight to be had there, because we all know that CO2 is not responsible for climate change in any form of fashion, and that the amount that man has put into the atmosphere is negligible. It would be nothing in any way to change anything. But what we are seeing are the effects of some dramatic changes gearing up and taking place every day now. And I know what some people are going to say, that these massive floods that we're seeing that break 100-year records, 200-year records, are manufactured. This is weather modification. To some degree, yes. I was talking about this 10 years ago. I haven't just suddenly come to the realisation that it's true. We've been talking about the close links to how they create the situation to create rain to fall, or to dry up clouds even, to stop rain happening, has been going on for a long time, and how very close that is related to the magnetic pole shift. Coincidentally, you might say not, more synchronized, Gene, not coincidence, because cosmic rays create and set up the same platform for heavy rains to fall, with the seeding of jet streams. So there in itself, if you ask me, is an elephant in the room. How come they are saying that they're doing these cloud seeding, and in some cases are, when there's no need to? Because if we look at nature, and with what's going on with the magnetic pole migration and the weakening of the magnetosphere, we've already got a situation that is set up to cloud seed the particles. And that is exactly what is taking place right now. And your politicians and their scientific organisations have set this up to blame the public, just so that they could tax us. And they have, heavily. But not only that, it's been one of the greatest public mistrusts of not a decade or decades, but century. This has cost industries globally, it's cost people's businesses globally, and for just one thing, so that these pigs can still have their luxurious lifestyles on the back of taxpayers. One thing I do wonder how these governments and politicians have ever got away with it is how their organisations ever got to the size in which they did. And a good example of that is if you look at China's parliament. It's got thousands of people who are nothing more than parasites living off the taxpayers, who they are now just openly going into the bank accounts of private individuals and just stealing the money, just like that. And it is coming from governments, because we all know that the Chinese Communist Party runs most of the companies, businesses, banks, etc. And therefore we know that the corruption levels is just as high in a country like that. than it is anywhere else in the world, like America or the UK or anywhere in Europe. But the reason why I bring your attention to China is because as I've said before, if you want to know what's coming down the road for us here in the West, with smaller populations in countries like the UK compared to China, what takes place in those countries obviously takes place first before it does in our countries. So what you're seeing now is just what's going to happen eventually here in countries like the UK. Now, with all their attention being taken off, what's going on in the Ukraine, that will dissipate into, infinity over the coming months. They will want to do that very quickly so that they can get into the mindsets of Ukrainians that this is the new norm now, and at least, we haven't got to worry about bombs falling every night. And there's another coincidence, you must have noticed the ramp up of drones being fired at the Ukraine capitals and other big cities, and that is just to smash their morale, drive them into the fact that they've got to give up territory, and it's worked. And I believe Trump had knowledge of this because of all of his calls that he's been making with Putin. I think one of the things that was made is, look, you've got 50 days to wrap this war up. Do it, so whatever you've got to do to get what you want, do it now. And of course, since we've started listening to that Orange Tango Taco man, the buffoon that has ruined his own industries in the United States, and I could name lots now, because since he got into power, he's done nothing but ruin people's lives in America, in my view. And no, he has killed off thousands of small businesses with his policies, like his tariffs. But this is the world we live in. I've sort of lost the train of thought where I was going with that, but this is all by design, and we're going to lose more of our freedoms, more of our rights. I mean, there is a massive suppression now on YouTube. It's clearly obvious to anybody that nobody gets without the algorithms controlling everything like a nanny state. A video that will get even the slightest virality of a footprint on YouTube, it's gone. And the reason why they want to get their hands on TikTok is because they've got very little control on it. So we know that Donald Trump wants to get his hands on that. I'm not just blaming Donald Trump here, because from what he's said over the last week, every administration that has been in the White House over the last 20 years, probably even longer, you know what I'm talking about, has been terribly corrupt. And not one person has faced jail over it. And it very likely will be the case that not one person will. Ever. Because we live in a two-tier system globally now. It is one rule for us and one rule for them. And they very rarely throw one of their own into the shark-infested waters. What I mean by that is, how many do you see elitists go into actual prison? Let's say in the last 15 years, how many have you seen actually get put in jail? Because they won't. Because money talks and bullshit walks. And people like me and you have got champagne tastes, but we've simply and sadly got lemonade pockets, and it don't get us nowhere. And that's why, it is hard to maintain enthusiasm running a channel like this, because of of the suppression, and then people not being supportive in protecting our little observatory, and then standing the risk of losing it entirely at a time when it should have been supported more heavily now than it ever has done. But I'll never forget, and it is even this week we've had a couple of people that have chipped in a few bucks on PayPal. It is always the same people, and I will never forget those people, because they're the ones that when it came down to, you know, the front lines in the war against these people, you know, manipulating science to a disgraceful level, I will always remember those people that stood at the front lines with me on this. So, you know, it's not the best of news, and I wish I had better news for you, but there simply isn't, because no news is good news. It never has been, has it? So, anything I can wish you guys is, you know, try and have the best weekend with your family. And you know what I think? A good start to having that best weekend cannot be beaten by having the best food that you can give your family. So if you've got a special recipe that you and your family like eating, or you want to try something new, give it a go. And just be with your family and just enjoy that time. And don't, if you can help it, focus any of your time or effort on the nonsense that's going on, because I hate to say it, but there is very little, as we've been shown, that we can do about it. I say what I usually do. As always, bye for now.